The Valerian cubs had been practicing for weeks in the crystalline training halls of the Imperial Guard Academy. Beneath the twin moons of Valoria Prime, the young warriors in training stood in perfect formation. Their scales shimmered like liquid mercury, their claws retracted just enough to appear civilized, and their eyes, those predatory, golden eyes, fixed forward with the intensity their instructors had drilled into them since hatching. The predator stare, Instructor Zarkoth had called it. The gaze that has made our people apex hunters across 17 star systems. The look that makes prey species freeze in their tracks. The stare that says, I am death, and you are already dead. Kiri stood in the front row, chest puffed with pride. At only 6 solar cycles old, she was the youngest cub in her cohort, but also the most determined. Her silver scales caught the artificial sunlight as she narrowed her eyes into slits, focusing every ounce of her being into that legendary stare. Her tail remained perfectly still behind her, a sign of a true predator, her instructor had said. No nervous twitching, no tells. Today was the day they would demonstrate their mastery to the diplomatic envoys visiting from the newly contacted species. The humans, the Galactic Council had been skeptical about humanity's admission. They were strange creatures, bipedal, covered in soft skin with barely any natural armor, no claws to speak of, no venomous fangs, no bioluminescent warnings. They seemed laughably vulnerable, the kind of species that should have been wiped out in their planet's first predator encounter. Yet somehow, impossibly, they had clawed their way to the top of their food chain. They had conquered their world, reached for the stars, and now stood as candidates for council membership. The Valorians, ever cautious, had sent their cubs as a test. If the humans couldn't handle the predator stare from younglings, how could they possibly negotiate with adult Valorians in matters of trade and territory? The doors to the training hall hissed open. Kiri's heart thundered in her chest, but she kept her expression frozen. This was her moment. She would make her clan proud. She would prove that even the youngest Valerian was formidable. The human walked in, and Kiri's first thought was, soft. Everything about the creature screamed vulnerability. It wore strange coverings over its skin, clothes, the briefing had called them, and its eyes were round and impossibly expressive. No slit pupils, no reflective tapetum. Just warm, brown eyes that seemed to drink in everything around them with innocent curiosity. The human was female, the instructors had mentioned. Her name was Alara. She had dark hair pulled back from her face, and she moved with an easy, relaxed gait that suggested either supreme confidence or complete ignorance of danger. Instructor Zarkoth gestured toward the line of cubs. Ambassador Alara, these are our finest young warriors. They wished to demonstrate a traditional Valerian greeting. Alara's face did something strange. The corners of her mouth curved upward, revealing small, flat teeth. Kiri had studied the human files enough to know this was called a smile. It supposedly indicated pleasure or friendliness, though it made no tactical sense to display one's teeth without intent to bite. How wonderful. Alara's voice was warm, almost melodic. I'm honored to meet you all. Instructor Zarkoth nodded. Cubs, initiate. As one, 20 young Valorians locked their golden eyes onto the human and deployed the predator's stare. Kiri poured everything into it. She imagined herself as the ancient hunters her grandmother told stories about, stalking through the crimson jungles of old Valoria, tracking prey for days, patient and merciless. She let her lips curl back just slightly, exposing the tips of her developing fangs. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. She became the embodiment of predatory focus. The effect should have been devastating. Instead, Alara's eyes went wide, and she made a sound that the translator struggled to interpret, something between a gasp and a squeal. Oh my goodness, she breathed, pressing her hands together. Oh my goodness, look at you all. Kiri's concentration wavered. This wasn't the response they'd trained for. Prey species were supposed to freeze, or flee, or submit. They weren't supposed to, whatever this was. Alara took a step forward, then another, moving directly toward Kiri's position in the front row. The cub's instructor tensed, ready to intervene, but Alara's body language showed no aggression. If anything, she seemed to be vibrating with barely contained excitement. She knelt down, bringing herself to Kiri's eye level. You're trying so hard, aren't you? Alara said softly, her voice dripping with what could only be described as affection. Such a fierce little warrior. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Kiri intensified her stare, determination flooding through her. She would not fail. She would not. Alara reached out and gently booped her nose. The tiny, soft impact broke Kiri's concentration completely. Her eyes widened in shock, her carefully maintained predator posture crumbling. Before she could recover, Alara leaned forward and pressed her lips to Kiri's snout in what the human database called a kiss. Precious baby, Alara cooed, her hands now gently cupping Kiri's face. With your little fierce face and your shiny scales. Who's a fearsome predator? You are. Yes, you are. Behind her, Kiri heard the suppressed choking sounds of her fellow cubs breaking formation. The predator stare was supposed to be unbreakable, a show of unity and strength. Instead, chaos erupted. Alara moved down the line like a force of nature, booping noses, scratching under chins, and making incomprehensible cooing noises at each cub. Look at these little murder mittens, she exclaimed, gently holding one cub's paw. And these scales. Do you moisturize? Your skincare routine must be amazing. By the time she reached the fifth cub, the formation had completely dissolved. Cubs were leaning into her touches, tails wagging despite their training, rumbling with the Valerian equivalent of purring. One particularly bold cub named Raxthor had completely rolled onto his back, exposing his vulnerable belly while Alara rubbed it, telling him what a good boy he was. Instructor Zarkoth stood frozen, his tactical mind unable to process what was happening. In 300 years of training warriors, he had never witnessed such a complete and utter failure of intimidation protocol or such a complete and utter success of something else entirely. Kiri found herself leaning into Alara's warm palm as the human returned to her, scratching behind her auditory ridges in a way that made her back leg kick involuntarily. You were so scary, Alara whispered conspiratorially. You almost had me. Such a talented little huntress. Later, in the diplomatic debriefing, Instructor Zarkoth would struggle to explain how humanity had defeated the predator stare not with superior intimidation, but with something the Valorians had no defense against, the apparently universal human compulsion to see anything small and fierce as adorable. The Galactic Council approved humanity's membership application immediately. After all, any species that could weaponize affection deserved a seat at the table, and Kiri? She received a package a week later, a human care package from Ambassador Alara, containing something called plushies, treats, and a handwritten note. To my favorite fierce little warrior. Never stop being scary. Love, Alara. Kiri kept the note tucked into her armor for the rest of her training. Some weapons, she learned, were more powerful than claws.